Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com. The good people at the Slate team reached out to me. They said that they really loved the custom opto video I did and asked if I would do one on the FG Dynamics. I said, sure, let me take a look at the FG Dynamics and see what it's all about. So I downloaded it a few days before making this and I started playing around with it. And it got me to thinking, you know, what is the actual origin of the FG Dynamics? And it comes down to what SSL was doing. SSL, when they started making boards, they said, okay, the most important thing that a board can do is be versatile. It needs to be a workhorse. While there's some great boards out there that have amazing sound, what we do with the sound is actually more important. So they weighed things on versatility. They made cards that, you know, had flexible Q, sweepable frequencies for the EQs, and then the compression had a number of settings where you could get soft knee, hard knee, fast attack, slow attack, different kinds of release curves, and it's just all fitting in one small space. So I said to myself, when I test this out, let me kind of go back to that original idea and say, okay, if this is doing its job, I should be able to do a complete mix using only a virtual channel strip. So I set up these SSL channels where I have the virtual channel right at the front, the VCC set to 4kg, then I have FG Dynamics, then FGS, and then a trimmer representing a fader at the end, and that's what I used for this whole mix. There's nothing else on here except for maybe one stray straggling trim plug in here. So I'm going to play this down, and then I'm going to throw on what I came up with in really only about an hour's time. Okay, so this is the way that I tracked it in. I'm going to play it again, and then while we're playing on playback, I'm going to switch it out to the Slate stuff. Now, one of the things I want to point out is that these are level matched. In fact, actually, we've lost a little bit of level when I switch it with all of my processing on. It's actually a slightly smaller sound, but what we keep is the openness and the tone and the dynamics of everything and the punch of everything. We go from something that sounds kind of very low, mid, heavy to something that feels very open. And so the first instinct might be it feels like it thinned out. But if we listen to it fresh without immediately comparing back to back, well, notice suddenly it doesn't sound thin anymore because it was actually just too full to begin with. It was muddy and cloudy and had a lot of low mid weight. So now that I've kind of just A-beat it and got where this mix is, I want to go through a couple of things that I noticed with the FG Dynamics that I think are worth pointing out. I'm going to start here with the snare drum because I think that there's a very special relationship between the SSL Dynamics and the snare drum. There's a very, very specific sound that we can get from it. And I feel like I've got that sound really nicely here. So I'm going to go through what I did here. We've got our snare top, and here's with my virtual channel in and the trimmer down. So a little bit of tone coming from the channel itself, but where most of the action is happening is on these inner modules right here. Let's flip on the compressor. So one of the things that's really interesting about the FG Dynamics, and this is true to the actual original form, is that it has this way of, when being set right, not exactly compressing. It kind of does the opposite. It makes things more dynamic. It adds punch. So the setting for this is the hard knee, not the heaviest ratio in the world, very quick release, and I'm using the linear release style here, and I'll compare those in a moment. But basically, because of these settings, the attack time allows a lot of the transient of the snare through, and so it ends up actually making things more punchy. It doesn't reduce dynamics, it adds them. So I'm going to take off the linear release, and to just sort of To match the actual amount of compression, I have to turn this down like 60 dB or so. Like, it really, really changes the action. But you'll notice that it makes the sustain and body feel a lot more forward and more in your face. I like that sound for drums quite a bit. It's not as natural feeling. The regular release curve is definitely more natural and tends to work better for things like bass guitar or acoustic instruments and stuff like that. But for drums specifically, especially close drums, I like it because it makes it feel like the sustain is getting pushed forward, and that is a very specific characteristic of this module, and I think that it's replicated really, really well here. So I wanted to point that out. Other than that, you know, it's just some EQ on the snare top to brighten it up and give it some more body. Nothing crazy about that. So same thing going on here in the bottom snare, but there's a slightly different idea behind it. I'm hard gating this snare a lot more because I kind of want this like almost white noise-ish sort of to sort of hit with the snare. I like that sound for this record. There's a jitteriness to this rhythm, and I think that that helps to bring it out. So cutting down the sustain, but also compressing very heavily as well. You see I have the ratio at infinite to 1. I've got the threshold dug down pretty deep. I'm using hard knee. I've got the linear release again. The release is very fast, so I'm basically creating a pretty streamlined burst of almost white noise energy here, and that gives it a lot of personality and energy, and the hard gating kind of helps it to feel a little bit jittery, and it also helps to keep it clean too. So if I were to like add a reverb later, it would play really nicely with what I've got. So without it, in fact, I'll just bypass the dynamics. I really like that start and stop thing. There's a sample that I have tucked in here as well, and there's sort of a similar idea. I'm hard gating the sample because the sample has a fair amount of tail in it. So I'm just using the gate to get rid of some of that tail. All right, the next thing that I want to point out here is going to be the room mics. So I did something very, very interesting on the rooms that I think is kind of cool. I sort of wanted to find a place where I could abuse the FG dynamics to really put it through its paces and see if I could come up with something that was like totally unique to it. So I'll bypass what I had. And now I'm going to bring in what I got. So there's a lot of weird stuff happening there, right? First of all, the gating is very obvious, right? When the snare hits this, the gating of the tone, it becomes immediately apparent. But then also there's this like jumpingness between the mid information and the side information. All the little tom fills are jumping into the center. All the snare bursts are coming out to the side. That was actually an accident as I was doing it. But then I listened to it and I was like, I kind of like it. It's weird. It's definitely not natural sounding, but obviously what I'm doing isn't natural to begin with, so those rules are out the window. And then the last thing is that there's a very distinct crunch tone to it as well. So we've gone from what's a pretty clean, clear, open room capture to something that's like super grainy, fizzy, fuzzy. So let's examine what that is. Basic stuff here. The channel in default position, trimmer in default position. So this is the mid mic. So here I'm actually getting distortion from the FG dynamics based on how much compression I'm doing. I'm overloading the compression circuit, which is causing some clipping to happen, and that's creating basically a fuzz effect. And then also I've got the gate set so that anything that is tailing out too long is getting chopped. And it's getting chopped pretty fast. I've got the release, pretty quick on there. And then no EQ. Just clicking the module in, but no EQ on there. That's the sound of the room right there. So if I pop one over to the side, same idea. Now it had to be set a little bit differently because the side information was picking up at a higher amplitude, so it's a louder signal to begin with, but similar concept right here. And here we can see the gate being set with the threshold too high, but me keeping it there anyway. And then we've got our usual suspects here with the, making sure we're in the red, using the fast attack, using linear release, basically just trying to get some fuzz going. Kind of feel like the room is maybe a little bit too loud though. I think I'm going to pull it down a bit. Cool. So those are some ideas just from the FG Dynamics. I like the way that we can use the linear release. I think that's unique to it. I like the way that we can break it up by over compressing it so that the actual clipping is happening from the compression action. I think that that's unique as well. But I want to point out one more thing, which is really nice, and that is when I put it on the bass guitar, I found that I didn't really have to change much in order to get something that I really immediately liked. And this is, I'm very tweaky when it comes to my settings and things like that, but I just want to play some of the bass and show you what I mean. Let me actually start at the beginning of the record because I think some of the dynamics are hearable, but there's like a sponginess that I like from this bass. I want it to have kind of this like round punch to it, this rounded attack, so I can kind of get like the bounce of it, but it has to be like the right movement. It has to be the right feel. It can't be spiky. It can't be like streamlined bass. It still has to feel like there's an ebb and a flow, like a pull and a bend to it. So let me give you the before and after here. So we're looking for that bump, 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 right? We want to hear that attack correctly. Like as soon as I put it on, I felt a good groove starting to happen. It was in, what was it? Default position here was half a second. The way the attack is sitting makes me feel that bass groove really immediately. The only thing that I felt like I needed to tweak was I just felt like that the bass needed a little bit more body to it, and so just by turning the release down to about half of what it was, it helped make it feel fuller. The release basically acts as like a body control. If you have a very fast release, you have a very full body to the sound. If you have a very slow release, you have a thinner body to the sound. But if you go too full, sometimes it ends up sounding kind of like bulky and streamlined. Like to me, that feels like it's all sitting in one place. It doesn't have a push and a pull, it just has a push. So finding that sweet spot, which was about here, gave me that perfect little, it has push, but it also has pull, but it also feels full. And my EQ. It was just nice to be able to throw it on and it like immediately worked. That was really nice. So in terms of my workflow, I don't do product reviews really. I show how I use a product. I think that that's more interesting. I think it's more informative for you guys. So since I'm learning this product right this week, I've only had it for a few days, you're sort of seeing me get the learning process. So I have to project what I think I'm going to be doing with it a little bit. But for bass guitar, I think it's pretty much a no-brainer because I can just slap it on there and it just does what I want it to do. Like, that sounds great. I have a feeling that that's going to translate really well to other forms of bass guitars and maybe to upright bass as well. And then also using the linear release, that is, I almost said linear phase, that is really, really nice on the close mics in particular on drums because of the way that it just pushes everything in your face. I think for a lot of sources, using the regular release is going to be better. It's going to have a more natural feel to it, a more musical feel to it. But for the close mics on drums in particular, it's going to have that almost like turn it into a sample kind of feel where it just pushes it really forward. And for close mics, that's exactly what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something that's overly hyped, something really close, something really bright, really heavy. You know what I mean? Because then when we blend it back in and it supports the overhead, it just makes the overheads feel much stronger and more powerful. So that's a definite use. And then I think anything where I'm trying to abuse something in a very specific way, gate something in a very specific way, I think that that's going to come up a lot. Like I'd see myself using this on drum room mics or really any room mics where I want to get some flavor and some juice into the vibe of things. But also I wanted to do it this way for one other reason, which is for some of you, you might want to try this approach where you kind of pre-set up these channel strips where it's set up the way that I've got it and just mix that way as if you were mixing on a virtual board. I think that that's part of the intention of what's going on here. It definitely feels like something where I could just kind of be like, okay, let me throw this SSL channel strip on everything and then just work from this virtual board and it's going to work. So I think that wraps up everything that I want to say about this. So thank you guys for checking me out here. If you dig this video, hit that like button. If you want to catch more of these videos, hit subscribe with the bell notification so that you can be notified. And if you have any questions about anything that you saw or you want to discuss some of these ideas, drop something in the comment section below. Lastly, here's what we say at Weiss Advice. We are musicians, sound is our instrument, and I will catch you next time.